passions is apologetics. And one thing that's really been changing a lot has been the exact questions that have been asked over time. You see, there was a time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where you went to an average college campus or even a high school campus, and you took a survey asking, what are major questions that people have about Christianity, about the Bible, about life in general? One of the big questions they would ask is it true? What's the evidence that this is true? Why should I believe that God is real? Why should I believe in Christians' interpretation of who God is? The basic questions usually revolved around the question of truth. What's fascinating is that that's no longer seems to be the big question that's being asked now by a lot of young people. The question now that's being asked is it good? Not is it true, the question is it good? Is this something that actually will make my life better? Is this something that actually will bring meaning and purpose to me? Is it something that I can stake my identity on? And so what we're going to be talking about today is this issue of identity and how it relates to the issue of truth and a lot of the really big issues and new things happening today that people 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, maybe didn't have to deal with that are playing into a lot of confusion that's happening today. How many of us, when we listen to a lot of the problems happening today, a lot of it has to do with the issue of identity? How many of us have noticed this? Be it our gender identity, our sexual identity, be it our what team do we root for? It's like my identity. Be it what do I believe about spirituality, my identity. The issue of identity has been a major point for this generation. And so we're going to look at what are some of the things that have caused this to come to be. And I wanted to start off by bringing to your attention a few interesting facts. First of all, is understanding what is happening in this generation. Okay, first of all, this is objectively the loneliest generation in recorded history. In 2023, the Surgeon General actually released a public service announcement, a general advisory, stipulating the idea that loneliness is actually being seen now as a genuine health epidemic. Not just in this cutesy, people are so lonely, we need to fix it. No, as in we're actually seeing major physiological and psychological issues developing in a younger generation due to this issue of loneliness, unlike ever before. Did you know that according to recent studies, the average family each day, how long would you say the average family each day spends time together as a family? What would you say? Give me a guess. You don't need 2 hours, 3 hours, what'd you say? An hour, 37 minutes. 37 minutes is the average amount of time that families spend just face-to-face together today. Can you imagine what that would have been like for you as a kid growing up, only really spending time with your family for a little more than half an hour a day? Just think about how that would have affected you. And what percentage of teenagers would you say spend time at least once a day with friends in person? Like not in school, but like outside of school, just hanging out with friends. What percentage of teenagers would you say spend times with friends at least once a day in person? Give me a percentage. Oh. Let me rephrase the question. When you older folk were growing up, how many of you guys spent time with your friends pretty consistently? How about younger folks now? Raise your hand. How many of you spend time with your friends outside of school in person each day? About 25% statistically of young people today actually spend time with any friends outside of school at least once a day. That's a fact. This is not only the loneliest generation, this is also the most depressed generation. Some of us are like, oh, he's talking to me. That's me. Now, I want us to understand first and foremost what I mean by depressed, okay? Depression does not mean being sad. This is something a lot of people misunderstand. When we talk about a generation that is depressed, depression doesn't mean I feel sad. Depression is an actual psychological condition where it's almost a numbness. How many people here have struggled with depression? I know I have. You're not alone. Depression is this sense of numbness. It's this sense of, am I even worth anything? Is there even a point to all of it? It's almost this feeling of, I would rather feel something bad because at least then I'd be feeling something. Any of us ever experienced that before? This is something that is a very real issue today. In fact, according to the CDC in 2023, 57% of teen girls and 27% of teen boys, we'll talk about why there's a difference there later, talk about this, have reported they felt persistently unhappy, persistently depressed, persistently hopeless. Now, I want to see this key word there is persistently. It doesn't mean they just occasionally felt sad. It's this idea that that amount of young people were constantly, that was their default, is being depressed, is being numb, is being, there's no point to any of it. That's the default emotion for many of them. In fact, 1 in 3 teenagers has seriously considered at one point taking their own life, according to the CDC. Just to give you an idea of how big a deal that is, you can't even use the S word for what that means, because you have noticed that people don't use the S word anymore for taking your own life. There's so much advisory against it because it's so triggering for so many people. That's how big of a problem it's become. It's also a searching generation. According to the FBI, since COVID, since 2020, between 2020 and 2024, there has been a 47% increase in juvenile gang affiliation, meaning a 47% increase in how many young people are joining gangs. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because they're looking for a place to belong. They're looking for somewhere that can tell them who they are. And is it any wonder that this is the case? When you think about it, when a child is growing up, what is the number one place that we find our identity growing up? It's our parents. It's our family. It's who do our parents tell us we are. It's who does my family tell me we are. It's my relationship with my family. Well, only about 70% of kids these days live in a 2-parent household. That's a third of all kids don't have both parents around. In fact, there's an interesting statistic here that 85% of Asian households, children live with their fathers. 74% of white children live with their father at home. 61% of Hispanic live with their father at home. And in the black community, it's 36% of children live with the father at home. By the way, you'll see an interesting correlation in crime statistics with those demographics and fatherlessness. Is it any wonder this is a generation that's looking for a place to belong when the very foundation of identity, being our relationship with our family, has been broken apart for so long? But there is hope in that as well, because while this is lonely and depressed and searching, did you know, this is fascinating, this is also the first generation in American history where church attendance is higher than previous generations. Higher than Gen X, higher than millennial, even higher than the really old boomers. This is the first time in American history where we're actually seeing the number of people attending church is going above what previous generations were. And it's because they are searching. It's because we're looking for somewhere to belong, looking for somewhere that can tell me, who am I? What is my purpose? Can anybody really know me and see me and still love me in spite of me? This is something that we're looking for so desperately. And so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be taking a look at what is it that gives us our identity. What is my identity? So in order to understand this idea of where we get our identity, first we have to define what identity even means, because it's one of those big words. It's kind of hard to, I was trying to explain to my daughter the definitions of words like, what does it mean to win? And it's hard to use certain words without using the word itself, isn't it? If you had to define identity, what would some of you say identity means? Not what is your identity, but what does it mean to have an identity? What would you say? Yeah? To know who you are, yeah. Your sense of self. Here's the thing. Your identity ultimately means, what is my purpose? Because when you think about it, your identity, who and what you are, comes down to what purpose you are supposed to serve. Think of it like a car. What is the purpose of a car? Don't overthink it. Transportation, get you safely from point A to point B. You know it is a car. You know its identity because you know its purpose. If I try to use that car for a purpose other than what it was intended for, I'm not going to have a very good time. For example, if I decide that my car, I actually identify my car as a boat, and I try to use it for that purpose, what's going to happen? I'm going to have a bad day, right? So understanding what is this thing, if I find a strange machine, if I find a strange object, if I find anything, and if I want to know what it is, the first thing I have to ask is, what does it do? What is it for? What is its purpose? So when we're asking ourselves, what is my identity? Who am I? What I'm actually asking is, what was my purpose? What is the purpose for which I am made? What is the purpose that I'm here on earth? How am I supposed to live my life? That's my identity. But then it goes even deeper than that. Because then the question becomes, well, where does my purpose come from? Who gives me my purpose? What gives me purpose? Let me ask some of you. If I ask some of you, what gives you some purpose today? What are some things that you would answer with? Your children. What else? Your parents. You said parents, right? Okay, parents. This actually might be easier without the mic. I have a pretty loud voice. Can y'all hear me okay? I'll go with this for now. For posterity. Now, I want you to notice what these things all have in common. We mentioned parents, we mentioned friends, we mentioned job, we mentioned the Lord, we mentioned sports teams. What is something you notice those all have in common? Yeah, relationships. Ultimately, the way I define myself, the way I understand who I am, is by how I relate to those around me. I, Joseph Starkey, who am I? I am the husband of Angela. I am the father of Adelie and Josiah. I am a teacher of this long list of students. I am a child of God. I am the son of Larry and Ethel. All these things that we define ourselves as ultimately comes down to my relationships. Can you see then why, if there is a loneliness epidemic, because ultimately what is loneliness? Loneliness is a lack of what? Relationship. So if my relationship is what gives me purpose, if my purpose is what informs me of my identity, then is it any wonder that in the loneliest generation in history, we also have the most confusion about identity as well? Now, when we talk about this idea of identity, when we talk about this idea of purpose and relationship, we have to understand that ultimately there are three questions that we ask ourselves that determines how we think of that question. The first one is, who do I see myself as? How many of us have some idea in our head of who we are? If your hand's not up, then I don't know what to tell you. So the first question I ask is, who do I think I am? The second question is, who do I think other people think I am? Notice I didn't say, who do other people think I am? Because I can never know that. I can't know other people's perspectives. It's, who do I think they think I am? How many of us spend time talking and thinking about that? What I think other people think of me. If your hand's not up, you're a more confident person than I am. And then finally, the third question is, who do I think God thinks I am? Again, notice it's not who does God think I am. It's who do I think God thinks I am? Because these are the three questions that we ask ourselves that inform us of who we think our identity is. And what we're going to do here is really break down the 4 issues that deal with this question of identity, that deal with this question of relationship. Now, in order to understand how something is broken, what's the first thing you have to understand? If your car suddenly is making weird noises and it's making a weird smell and there's smoke coming out where there shouldn't be any smoke coming out, in order to fix it, what do you first have to understand? And in order to understand what's broken, what do you have to understand? How it's supposed to work. If you don't know how something is supposed to work, you will never be able to identify the problem and fix it. How many of us have sent our car to the mechanic and they fixed something that clearly wasn't the problem? You say, well, that's however much money down the drain. And yet we're at their mercy, aren't we? I don't know about you, but I'm at the mercy of my mechanics because I don't understand how my car's supposed to work. So whatever he tells me is the problem, guess what I got to do? I just got to trust him and hope that he's not trying to fool me. Same thing with life. This world is going to tell us all kinds of things about what our purpose is, about what our relationships are supposed to be, about what our identity is. And if we don't understand what it's supposed to be, if we don't understand how it's supposed to work, we'll be helpless before those assertions. So the first thing I want to talk about is, who does God say that I am? When we think, how many of us, let me ask you guys this, when we think about who God says I am, what are some things that come to our mind? His child, what else? Loved. Yeah. Accepted. Servant. Redeemed. Notice again what all these have in common. All these have in common is the idea of a relationship with him. In order to understand how God sees us, there's a couple things we need to understand about who God actually is. And so I want to take a big step back here and get a big top-down view of this question. Because if it's true that my identity comes from purpose comes from relationship, and what is at the heart of what makes relationships work? This thing that every song is about, that every poem is ultimately about, is about what? Love. That means that love is at the center of it. So then what does God have to do with this? We need to understand something very important here about God's nature. One of the things that the Bible talks a lot about is the idea that God is love. Notice it's not just that God is loving. It's this idea that God literally is love itself. This idea that love, with a capital L, is an actual, intelligent, living being that created everything. What does that mean? How does that work? One of the things that makes the biblical understanding of God so unique in the world is the idea of the Trinity. Now, the Trinity, who here can explain the Trinity in very short, if you can try to explain that really quick, yeah? So, here you go. So the idea of the Trinity is this idea that with it, that God is one. We are monotheistic, meaning there are how many gods? One God. But within God, there are 3 persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One God, 3 persons. This is something that we can't fully comprehend, right? Because it's so beyond our personal experience. One of the least bad ways I've heard to explain this to me was, imagine this chair. This chair is a what? If I said, what is this thing? You would say what? It's a chair. Now, if I went to this lady here and I said, what is this? What would you say? A person. But does that really fully encompass what I'm pointing at here? Because it's not enough to ask what this is. What else should I ask? Who is this? Suddenly, is there a whole other dimension that we're talking about? Now, if I ask who, does that make sense of this chair asking who this is? No, exactly, no. This is a what, but it's not a who. This is a what, but she's also a who. Okay? So there is something about her very existence that is higher than anything this chair could ever be or hope to comprehend. Following along? And so now take that a step further. What is even higher than being just a what and a who? When we talk about God, God is one what. What is he? He is God. But he is also three whos. And so in the same way that chair can never comprehend what it means to be a who, we can never comprehend what it means to be three whos. Sound like Dr. Seuss here now. The reason I bring this up, okay, Joseph, that's interesting and all, but what does it have to do with anything? The reason this matters so much and why this is integral, so important to our understanding of our identity, is this means that God, at his foundation, at the very core of his being, is a relationship. An eternity past to eternity future, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit have been and always will be a relationship. That is what we mean when we say that God is love. Because in order for love to exist, in order for me to love, there has to be something that is not me in order to love. Does that make sense? If it's just me that exists, can I love? No. Love, by definition, requires something that is not me in order to love. This is why the Trinity matters, because it means that God is able to love without anybody else being there. See, this is one of the big differences between the God of Christianity and every other monotheistic religion like Islam, is that if there is no Trinity, God cannot be love. Because think about before God created everything. When you think about it, one of the reasons every child asks, why did God make everything? What's the first thing every child will assume as to why God made us? Because he was what? Lonely. Sound familiar? And if God was not Trinity, that would be true. That would mean that God had to create us in order to experience love. What's the problem, though? Now that means that God needs us, and that means he's no longer God. See a problem here? But the reason why the biblical understanding of God matters is because God is three in one. Because he is a relationship, he does not need anybody else to be complete. We mentioned earlier the things of saying, I am a son, I am a father, I am a student, I am a teacher, I am a teammate, I am a friend. Ultimately, when we talk about our identity, I am is always followed by something else because our identities depend on there being somebody other than us to relate to. But when God says what his name is, what does he say? I am what? I am. Why? Because he doesn't need anything else to be complete. Because he is love and relationship. That means that he is purpose. That means that he is identity. And so what does that have to do with us? So that's very interesting. It's very fascinating. But now let's tie that to us. Because when God made us, why did he make us? It's really simple. What's the one thing that love wants more than anything else? Parents, what's the one thing you want for your children more than anything? Love. More than anything, what you want for your children is for them to love and to know that they are loved and to be able to spread that love even further. It is in the nature of love to want to share that love with more things to love who can love in return. That's why love is the one thing you can pour out, and it only fills up even more the more you pour it out. So when God made us, he made us first and foremost to love him, to understand, to be in relationship with him, to experience that eternal love and relationship that God is. And so when he made us with this idea that we would be in relationship with him. He designed us to crave connection. When God made Adam, he said Adam was what? As for all of his creation, he said it is good. But is that the last thing that he said about Adam? Because if you'll notice something very interesting is as Adam was doing his work, what did God say was a problem? It is not good what? For man to be alone. Well, hang on a second. I thought that God made this relationship with him. What is God suddenly meaning it's not good? Because what love wants more than anything is to grow love, is to expand that love, is for other people to experience that love. You know when you watch that movie that you really enjoy, what's the only thing better than watching your favorite movie for the first time? Watching it with someone else who has never seen it before. You know that feeling? Because what love wants above all else is for other people to also know what love is like. So when God made us, when God made Adam, he wanted Adam to have somebody who he could show what Adam's love with God was like, to spread that to somebody else even further. And then what did he tell Adam and Eve to do? Go and make babies. Go make more of you. More humans that you can spread this love and relationship with. And in those relationships, you will find purpose. And in that purpose, you will find identity. Now, that's sort of the spiritual side of understanding how God made us. But we need to understand, this is coming together here into what we're going to be talking about here, is that we are not just spiritual beings. We are also physical beings. God made us body and spirit. In the old days, in the early church, there was a heresy called Gnosticism. Anybody know what that was? Can anybody define Gnosticism for me? It's a fancy word. Yeah? Not quite. So Gnosticism was the idea that the physical world is evil. Physical is evil, only spiritual is good. Therefore, Jesus didn't really have a physical body because only physical is bad. This was a heresy. So this idea that we are only a spirit with a body is actually not accurate. To be human doesn't mean that we're spirits with a body. We are body and spirit. To be human means to have a foot in both worlds. We see this whenever Jesus says to love God with all your what? Heart, soul, mind, and strength. The idea here is that it's a very common misunderstanding that, well, we're spirits who live in a body. No. We are spirit and body. This is why the Bible says that one day we are going to have new bodies. There's going to be a resurrection of the body. We're not going to spend eternity as a disembodied spirits. We're going to have a new body as God intended it to be. Which means then that we should see that body work in a way that is consistent with the purpose that God gave us. And I want to go over a couple of very interesting little chemicals here with you guys. And it's fascinating how God made this to work. I want to talk about, first of all, dopamine. You guys ever heard the term dopamine? So dopamine is what we call the reward chemical. Dopamine is what reinforces behavior. It motivates you. This is that when you accomplish something good, when you finish putting that Lego set together, when you finish writing that report, when you finish doing something worthwhile and you get that good feeling of having done something good, that is dopamine at work. And so in relationships, we get this when somebody compliments us. How many of us have had somebody compliment us to us before? I hope so. If not, I'll tell you right now, you're beautiful people and the Lord loves you. And so that good feeling we get, that is dopamine. When we get attention, when we're looking forward, anticipating, hanging out with our friends and doing something together, that is dopamine in our brain telling us that this was a good thing, here's a reward for doing it. God made that in us. This is why, by the way, things like affirmation matter. People who never receive compliments, people who are never affirmed, there's something missing. There's something missing there. Because their body's not getting that chemical that God designed us to get. This is why approval feels so powerful. when we feel approved of, when we feel like somebody genuinely is telling us you are worthwhile, that's a good feeling, isn't it? And that's the dopamine that God designed us to experience to reinforce that behavior. And that's why rejection hurts so deeply. Because God designed us for acceptance. And think of it as a cycle of reward. So the way God designed this to work is that when we love others, when we lift others up, they experience dopamine. And then how many of us feel good making other people feel good? Yeah. And so when I experience that makes me feel good. It makes me want to keep doing it. It's amazing how God designed us in this way, that our very bodies reward us for the sorts of behavior that God encourages us to do. But here's the problem. See, here's where sin comes into the picture. Because our bodies don't necessarily differentiate between good dopamine and bad dopamine. And what sin does, what evil does, evil takes what is good and twists it into something other than how God intended it to be. So just like how we can get that dopamine, that chemical, from doing the things God told us to do that reinforces that behavior, it can also be used to reinforce bad behaviors. We'll talk about that here a little bit. Second chemical I want to tell you guys about is called oxytocin. You guys heard of that one before? It's a fun word. It's also called the love hormone or the bonding hormone. This is the one that gives that sense of loyalty, the sense of trust, the sense of empathy, that physical feeling that we get when you trust somebody and you feel calm with somebody. And so in a relationship, when you get a hug, how many of us have gotten a hug this week? So some of us need to go around and give other people a hug here. When you get that really good warm hug, right? That good feeling you get, that's the oxytocin that God has made in us, that's releasing in us, that's giving us that pleasure, that sense of warmth, that sense of belonging. God designed our brains, God designed our bodies to work in accordance with the purpose that He gave to us. But just like with everything else, sin has a habit of coming in and ruining what God put together. So here's the thing. Let me bring this down to us. In a perfect world, here's how this works. God made us for this amazing, almost a self-feeding spiral upward. Here's how this works, is we do something good. I feel good when I do it. When I feel good when I do it, that gives me the deeper appreciation in my spirit for how God designed the world. And then that makes me want to grow closer to God, to experience what the goodness that He is more. And as I grow closer to God, I want to do those good things more. I want to love others more. And as I love others more, He's designed my body to experience pleasure in response to that, which gives me a deeper appreciation for His goodness, which makes me want to draw closer to Him, which makes it, you guys see how this is a constant cycle, but see how it's an upward spiral? At the end of Narnia, The Last Battle, how many of us read Narnia, The Last Battle? Read Narnia? At the very end, when they're in heaven, and the phrase there is further up and further in. It's this idea that heaven is a place where you are constantly, you're not just sitting there in an eternal church service singing worship songs forever. That sounds like the other place, to be honest. What heaven is a constant growth, a constant growing in love and appreciation and relationship, and eternally going this upward dance. Closer and closer and further up and further into relationship and purpose and identity. Isn't that amazing what God made us for? But we live in a broken world. And what sin does is sin takes the good things that God made and twists it into something other than how God intended it to be. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said that our desires are like the keys on a piano. There is no wrong key on a piano, but what you can have is the keys played at the wrong time. In the same way, all the things that God gave us, all the desires He's given us are good. But what sin does is it takes that and twists it into something else. And so just like how growing closer to God puts us in this upward, amazing, eternal dance into a deeper appreciation for goodness and love, running from God does the opposite. Tell me if this sounds familiar for any of our lives. Life is hard. I go through something. It hurts. And I turn to something other than God to relieve that pain. alcohol, drugs, other relationships, whatever addiction it is, I turn to something other than God to relieve that pain. When I flee from God to relieve that pain, I find that the pain gets worse. I find that it doesn't work. I seek after something other than God to relieve that, but it doesn't work, and now the pain is worse. And so I go further from God. I flee past after something else. I go deeper into that addiction, deeper into that thing that I'm turning to, which brings me further from God, which deepens that sense of something missing and that sense of loneliness, which makes me pursue that thing even further, which brings me further from God. Does this sound familiar to any of us? God designed us to work in this amazing upward dance. But what sin has done is it's come and reversed it and turned to something that takes us away from God. Now, what we're going to be taking a look at here tonight is 3 big issues today that kind of draw us away from God. Issues today that themselves are not good or bad, but are issues today that this generation has had to deal with that other generations haven't really seen as that big of an issue. It is the issue that this generation has been struggling with. We're going to talk about social media. An issue this generation is now struggling with being gender identity. And an issue that this generation is now going to start struggling with being AI. We're going to talk about those 3 things and how they relate to this idea of identity, purpose, and relationship. So first of all, social media. Let me ask us, how many of us here have a social media account? I do. How many of us here have more than one social media account? What are some examples of social media accounts that we have? TikTok, what else? Facebook. Tell me you're over 30 without telling me you're over 30. That's me, by the way. What else? Instagram, yeah. What else? Give me some other ones. Oh gosh, tell me you're 40 without telling me that you're MySpace, yeah. Twitter, X. We still call it Twitter, even though it's not what it is. But yeah, basically Twitter. What else? LinkedIn. The professional, I see. Discord, very nice, the gamer. YouTube also counts. There's a comment section in there. How many of us go on YouTube at least once a day? I know I do. Now, let me start off by saying this, guys. This is not going to be a let's bash why social media is terrible and is of the devil, okay? Understand social media is a tool. Is a tool good or evil? It's neither. What determines that? Yeah, it's how you use it. Social media is a tool, and there are so many amazing things social media can be used for, has been used for. I think of friends I've reconnected with through social media. I think of times where I was going through something difficult, and friends would send me encouragement, and I was so encouraged, and I was so lifted up by what I saw on social media. The hobbies and communities that I've joined through social media that I've seen, there are so many good and amazing ways that social media has improved our lives. But again, what sin has a habit of doing is coming in and taking something good and doing what to it? Twisting it. So the same platform that draws me closer to people can also drive us away when election season comes along. Yeah, some of us are like, I'm staying off Facebook for a very long time after that. The same tool that brings me such encouragement can also bring me so much discouragement. Bad things. People die. People killed. Statistics. Economy terrible. Does this look familiar? And so what we're doing here today, guys, is this isn't going to be about here's why social media is bad, okay? Rather, what I want to do is inform you of some facts about social media and how it is impacting you now so that you can be better prepared to use it well. For example, let me put it this way. How many of us here had taught our kids how to drive? Who here was the brave one who wore the full body armor and helmet and all that? Now, when you're teaching your kid how to drive, what do you spend more time doing? Telling them how awesome cars are or telling them how dangerous cars can be? But why? Why did you spend more time telling your kids how dangerous cars are than you did about how great they were? Right. You don't need to tell them how great cars are. How many of us here are looking forward to the day that we can drive, you younger folk? Yeah? Okay, parents, look out for those ones. You don't need to tell people how great driving is. What we do need to do is inform kids about how dangerous it can be so that we can enjoy the good parts of it. Same thing with social media. We're going to be talking about some of the dangers of it. This does not mean that social media is bad. It just means that there are dangers to be aware of so that they can be used in a way that is good. Make sense? All right. So let's start with this. Let's start with the effects that overuse of social media has. How many of us in here are on social media for at least 30 minutes a day? And by social media, I mean anything like with a comment section. Could be Facebook, could be Instagram, could be YouTube, could be TikTok, anything like that. Okay, how many of us that's at least an hour a day? How many of us that's at least 2 hours a day? So much like, I kind of getting a little depressing now. I won't go any higher than that. Here's the thing. A couple weeks ago in my civics class, whenever we go over the judicial branch, one of my classic things I like to do is I like to show the kids the old movie 12 Angry Men. Anybody seen that before? Old black and white movie. We talk about the judicial branch. I show them 12 Angry Men about how a jury works. And there's something I always have to explain to them, is at the beginning, when they're all sitting around the table, they're all smoking. You ever notice how in those old movies, people are always smoking? Why? Why do we see that more then than we do now? True. And what did they not know? It was doctor recommended back then. What did they not know? Back then, they didn't know how dangerous it was. Now that we understand how dangerous it is it quite as widely spread as it was back then? Not so much. And so for a lot of people, a lot of us don't realize how overuse of social media is actually bad for us. Let me give you a few statistics here, a few facts here. For example, the National Institute of Health says, what percentage of people between the age of 13 and 17 do you think use social media? Give me a percent. 1,000%. Some of us do it enough to make that a statistic. 85, 70, 90. According to the National Institute of Health, it is in fact 95% between the ages of 13 and 17 are on social media. About 1/3 of that number are on it constantly. Constantly. As if they're not doing anything else, they're doing this. Oh, hey, look, I got a message. Now, and here's where it gets a little bit crazy, though, is that whenever you're making a social media account, one of the questions it will ask you is, are you at least 13 years old? Why? Liability, right. The idea here is that you need to be at least 13 years old. What percentage of kids between the ages of 8 and 12 do you think have a social media account? It's about 40%. Let me say that again. 8 years old, 3rd grade to 6th grade. Don't just on social media, have a social media account and are on it consistently. That is a fact. 50% of teens are on social media at least 4 hours a day. Let me say that again. 50% of teenagers are on social media at least 4 hours a day. Some of us are like kind of shrinking down in chairs a little bit here. Stop talking about me. What does that actually do to us? And more importantly, why do we do that? Because this is actually so fascinating. This is such a fascinating study over the past 10 years or so. The sociologists around the world are just super excited about this because as bad as it is, they have something to study. How many of us, go ahead and take a look here. Can you play this? We'll play this video in just a minute here. This is the average layout of a Walmart. Now, I want you guys to close your eyes and picture every Walmart you've ever been to. Okay? Where's the milk? In the back. Where's the toys? On the side. Where's the clothes? In the middle. Isn't that fascinating? It's actually really interesting. Walmart has actually spent tens of millions of dollars on professional psychologists, specifically strategizing the most money that they can make by organizing their store in a certain way. Walmarts and casinos are some of the most psychologically dense layouts you'll ever find. Why is the milk in the corner? We know the answer. Because you got to pass everything else in order to get there. Why are groceries and toys on opposite sides? True, we don't want that. But what will the kids want to do after going to the groceries? Go look at the toys. So what are you going to have to do to get to the toys? Go through the whole store. They know exactly what they're doing, even down to which colors are showing at the end of each aisle. They are incredibly strategic on this point. Companies know how to take your money. Sorry, not take. Get you to voluntarily give it up for your own good. They are experts at this. And social media companies are no different. Meta, which is the company that owns what? Facebook and Instagram and a couple other things, right? Mark Zuckerberg, hail our lizard overlord here. They are also companies, they have spent millions and millions of dollars on psychiatrist specialists to specifically figure out how to maximize how much time you spend on social media. Because you have to understand something here, guys. How do social media companies make money? How many of us pay for a Facebook account? How many of us pay for just having a YouTube account? Who here pays for your X account? If your hand was up, you're being swindled. They're all free, which raises the question, how do they make money? Anybody know the answer? Advertisements. We know the answer. That's why ad blocker is my best friend on Chrome. They make money through ads, which means how do they maximize how much money they make from you? By making more ads appear on your screen is how they make more money. So how do they figure out ways to get you to spend more time on your screen? There's a few tricks that they use here. Tell me if this sounds familiar to any of you. First of all is a few years ago, pretty much every social media did something very interesting. You see, there was a time when I was on Facebook and I'm scrolling down, I had to push a little button at the bottom that said, click to continue. Remember that? And then it would load the next section, scroll down, click to continue. Sound familiar? Is that a thing anymore? You kids don't know this. No, now it auto-loads. There is no bottom. There was a fascinating study done by Stanford University called the Endless Bowl Experiment, where what they did was they got a bowl of soup, and one of the groups, their bowl they didn't realize would constantly slowly refill. As they're eating the soup, their bowl would slowly refill. And what they noticed is that the people with the bowls that kept refilling ate 73% more soup than the people with normal bowls. Because they didn't have the visual cue that it's time to stop. That's how our human mind works. Social media companies know this. And so by making the bottom keep loading, you don't have the visual cue to stop. Another trick that they use is autoplay. What is autoplay? Kids tell me. When the video ends, the next one, do you have to click somewhere to start the next video? No. The next one begins immediately. Because it takes away the visual cue that it's time to stop watching. Another trick that they use is, this is the big one right here. It's called variable reward. See, this is a dopamine trick. Talked about dopamine. This is a dopamine trick that casinos use. Right? What is one of the most addicting things in a casino? Answered real quick there. It's the slot machines, right? Because there's something about pulling it and seeing what's going to come up and then ding, 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 ding. Whether you win or lose, your brain gives you a hit of dopamine. That's what makes gambling so addictive, is the dopamine. Our brain craves that dopamine rush that we get. Well, think about it. Get in your phone. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Notification. Hey, I got a couple likes. Does that feel good? Hey, people liked my comment. People thought I was funny. Hey, people commented on my post and said nice things. Does that feel good? Now, here's what we don't, how many of us get these notifications on our phones? Here's what we don't realize is that there's actually a science behind how social media companies make this happen. What we mean is that did you know you don't actually get notifications the moment that they happen? See, when somebody likes your post, when somebody comments on what you said, you don't actually get the notification for that right away. Rather, what happens is it will wait until you get several and then bundle it together and will time it out to a rhythm to give you those notifications to get you to come back, to come back, to come back. This is a trick that they use. Now, why does this matter? What do we say here? Let's pull this in because want us to get to our break here. John Hopkins Medical, major medical university, says this. He says that social isolation, that kids who spend a lot of time on social media don't have hardly any time in face-to-face conversations. And this has a direct impact on oxytocin output, has a direct impact on dopamine. In fact, a lot of kids don't get the sleep that they need. How many of, not just kids, how many of us find ourselves, it's 2:30 at night, find ourselves scrolling a little bit? This has a direct impact on our health and well-being. So what are some things that we can do to gain control of this? The American Psychiatric Association gives a few clues. First of all, there are apps that will help you to track your time. There are apps that will help you to keep up with, you've been on for an hour, time to turn this off. You've been on for 3 hours, go get some help. 5 hours, are you still alive? In fact, by law, some places have to do this. This is why Netflix occasionally will have that, are you still watching? Because if they don't have that, how many of us would have just sat there and kept going? Also, this is a simple thing we can do, is turn off notifications. Seriously, how many of us, that's our first thing to do? This app would like to send you notifications. What's your first reflex? No, keep that up. Do not get notifications. That's a big way that you can detox your brain's dopamine. Because in the same way our brain can be wired to seek dopamine from these places, you can also rewire them to be more healthy. And so by simply turning off notifications, that goes a long way towards helping your brain regulate itself once again. And here's a big one, is working with a partner. In Ecclesiastes, it says that two are what? Better than one, and pity the man who what? Who stumbles and there is nobody there to help him up. Find a partner to help you with this. Find somebody who can help you to stay accountable on how much time you spend on social media. Who's going to ask, hey, how long were you on Facebook yesterday? 4.5 hours. Some of us are like, yeah, that was me. And a couple words of advice for parents, okay? Parents, your involvement is necessary. You have to be involved. How many of us, our kids, have one of these? How many of us are like, not until they're 30? It's like dating, not until you're married, right? Here's the thing. You have to be involved as a parent. This is a powerful tool, and it can be addictive. Do not expect a child to self-regulate addictive actions. Let me say that again. Do not expect a child to self-regulate something that's addicting. Parents, be involved. Be aware of your kid's screen time. Get one of those apps that actually will tell you how long they've been on it. Tell you, and one of my coworkers actually has a rule every night. His kids have to turn their phones into him, and he will look at their history and will look at what they've been doing with it all day. You think they like that? No. Well, I'll tell you what, his kids are some of the best kids I've ever taught. And ask yourself one simple question, parents. I think this is the one that hit me the deepest because it's really simple. And we'll end this section on here. Parents, how often do your kids see you doing this? How's that bus feel? Thrown under it. Here's the thing, guys. Whether your kids have one or not, fact is they're going to have one of these one day. It's going to happen. That's the world we live in, whether they have one now or not. And they're taking their cues from you. Now, I say this to myself as much. I find myself doing this in front of my kids more often than I should. And something I'm learning is that this is what's going to teach them what matters, is what they see me doing. My daughter is watching me. Many ways that I wish she wasn't. But parents, the most important thing for you is to ask yourself, how often do my kids see me on this? And so this is why social media has such a big impact on our sense of relationship, because they do impact our relationships. They do impact the way we relate to others, which then impacts my sense of purpose, which impacts the sense of why am I here if not to be in relationship with these people who are always on social media. And that affects my identity. We'll end on one short 2-minute video, and I will take our break.
Driving with a box stuck under his car. And like, who knows how long he was driving. I saw him pull out of the parking lot and turn right, and the box was still stuck under his car. So who knows how long he was driving with that box under his car. I bet he got home, he pulled into his driveway.
Out in the sky. I'm not. Wow. And like, if you, it's not.
I don't think it's real. I don't think it's real.
I see the lineup for car. It's getting wasted. The Empire State Building is like really close to it, so it's a good.
Happy birthday. Start it again.
All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So, as a reminder, the idea here we're talking about is identity crisis. There's this idea that there is an identity crisis in this generation, this sense of who am I? I don't know who I am. And where that comes from is from a lack of understanding of what is my purpose. And a lot of where that confusion comes from is a lack of deep, meaningful relationship. And we're just having a really interesting conversation during the break here where I mentioned, was it your father you said? Back in the day when like radio first became a thing, you had the families gathering around the radio, right? And then what did families start gathering around? The TV, and then maybe around the computer. Now, because and what's fascinating here is that it's this frog in the pot mentality. You've heard of the frog in the pot? Where if you put a frog in boiling water, what happens? Boo, jumps out. But if you put in regular water, do what? Slowly turn it up, frog doesn't notice. Because you'll notice the thing about the radio and the TV is that you still were together around it. Now, I don't need to be around anybody to be on this. In fact, being around people can prevent me from being on this. I can't have that, can I? It's interesting seeing how we progress to that point. So now what we're going to be talking about. So this is an issue that has been being dealt with for basically since around 2008 to 2010 is when social media really started becoming a really big part of our everyday lives. Now what we're going to talk about is the issue that has been hitting us recently. Oh boy. Lord help me. Let me start off by asking this. How many of us have been personally affected by the issue of gender confusion, be it ourselves or maybe a loved one, a family or a friend? How many of us have been impacted by this question in some way, shape, or form? If you haven't yet, you will be soon. When we're talking about gender identity, there's the key word there. What are some things, when we talk about gender identity, what are some things that come to your guys' mind as far as what people are dealing with today? Tell me some impressions you have. What are some things you relate to this? The existence of more than two genders. How many genders are there? What else? What are some other questions we have heard or comments we've heard made about this issue? There are people who don't identify as either gender. Non-binary. Fluid. Kind of go between one to the other. What on earth does all this mean? What is even this whole thing about gender identity? Because this is something that has become a very big issue nowadays. This is fascinating. 10 years ago, according to, I think it was the American National Health Association, 10 years ago, the percentage of young people who identified themselves as some sort of something on we call it the gay BCs, the LGBTQIA plus, whatever letter you're on there, was about 2%, about 10 years ago. Suddenly, around the year 2021, that number jumped up to 10%. I wonder if something happened around that time. Suddenly, COVID hits, and you have kids who are, by law, required to be stuck in their house, isolated, without relationship, alone. pretty much all day, every day. Suddenly this number skyrocketed. What happened? Where did all this come from? And what's interesting is that actually over the past couple of years, since about 24, the number's fallen back down to 2% again. And yet the ideas still persist. The idea of gender identity, the idea of I decide who I am, is still very much around. And you still have people who will very powerfully defend this. How many of us have ever had a conversation about this issue and it seemed like someone got very emotional about it? This can be a very difficult issue to talk about. Okay, let's get real. This is a very difficult, messy, tricky issue to talk about because for so many people, there are so many emotions tied up into it that it can feel like, how do I even talk about this to somebody? So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about what is this issue, where is it coming from, and how do I actually talk to somebody about it? So let's start with a basic understanding of truth. You live by your truth, and I will live by my truth. Oh, you think that Jesus is God? Well, I'm glad that that's your truth, but that's not my truth. Oh, you believe that our purpose is to worship God? Well, that's your truth, and I'm glad that that gives you purpose, but that's not my truth. Does this sound familiar? Live your best life. Be true to your authentic self. Anybody heard these before? I'm going to throw a couple of terms at you guys to understand where all of this is coming from. First of all, 30 years ago, if you had tried to say these sorts of things, what would have probably happened? Yeah, you'd have probably been mocked, maybe beat up, got your milk money taken from you. What changed? What happened? There's a couple of terms that we have to understand about how this world thinks today compared to how it used to think. You see, some time ago, there was this idea called modernism. Modernism is the idea that truth is objective, that there is a truth and then we can learn what it is. If you want to think of it as like a target, anybody here done archery or shooting before at targets? Yeah, so imagine there's a target, and you know how accurate you are based on how close or how far you are from that bullseye. Make sense? And so in modernism, the idea of truth is there is a target, there's truth, and I filter my ideas through that truth, and I can know how close or far from truth my ideas are. This is the foundation of even just science. Does this sound like it makes sense? Then, around the turn of the century, we had this idea of postmodernism. Any of us heard this term before? Postmodernism is this idea, well, truth is more relative. It's more a matter of perspective. In that every perspective is just as valid as every other perspective. And so going back to our target analogy, imagine instead of there being a target that we all know is the target, truth, we all can kind of make our own targets. And then however accurate or far I am is about how close I am to my definition of truth. That is the filter that I use to define what I think is true. And then I make my decisions and values based on what I believe is true. Make sense? We're past that. We no longer live in a postmodern culture. What we live in now is what's called a meta-modern culture. What that means is that rather than there being an objective target, something that is true, that I can base my beliefs off of as being true or false. And it's not even a matter of I make my own targets and aim at that target and then I'm right or wrong depending on that. Now what it is, metamodernism, is first I shoot my shot, I see what makes me feel good, ping, and then I draw the target around where it landed. Because now what's happened is, at least in postmodern, there is a sense of I'm going to base my values off of what I think is real. What now we have is the complete opposite. What we have now is it's no longer I'm going to base my values off of what I think is true. Now it's I'm going to base what I think is true off of what I value. You see the difference? And so we live in what has been coined a post-truth culture. The idea that truth is for each, you are your own truth. Understand, you don't just make your own truth anymore. You are your own truth. Sounds eerily close to something that Jesus said, isn't it? I am the way, the truth, and the life. We've now come to the point of rejecting truth so much that now each of us is our own way, truth, and life. And in such a world as that, is it any wonder that there's so much confusion? That there's so much anxiety, so much loneliness? So what does this have to do with the issue of gender? Because we have to understand that truth has consequences. Have you ever heard the phrase, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're what? Sincere. As long as you're sincere. Here's the problem with that. I can sincerely believe with all my heart that my bank account's got 6 digits in it, 9 digits in it. We're going to go even further than that. But if I try to live my life as if that's true, are there going to be consequences? Yes. I can firmly believe, sincerely believe with all my heart that if I take a step off the roof of this building, I will soar and be free. I can truly believe that. But if I live my life as if that's what's true, are there going to be consequences? Yes. There'll be very quick consequences. Truth has consequences. So we have to understand, first and foremost, guys, before we go any further, I want us to understand that our motivation when talking about this issue is not going to be to show why I'm right and why you're wrong. See, this is a big problem with how many people talk about this issue. We come at it from this idea of, I want to prove you're wrong. I want to win an argument. I need to convince you that my way of seeing it is right. When the Bible talks about truth, it talks about telling it with gentleness and respect. And so love speaks the truth. If there is such a thing as truth, that means there are consequences for living in a way that doesn't align with it. See, when it comes down to it, there's only 2 possibilities. Either I give myself purpose, I give myself my identity, or someone else does. And love seeks what's good for somebody. So if it's true that there is no God and I make my own truth, the loving thing to do is to affirm whatever that person says their truth is. But if there is a God who did make us with purpose and identity, then the loving thing to do is to try and show people what that is, because that's the only way there will be contentment and satisfaction and peace. So what are some facts about this? First of all, the word gender. Historically speaking, the word gender has always meant basically synonymous with sex. All the way since the 14th century, when it first started being used in English lexicon, it was used interchangeably with sex. It's male, female, man, woman. There was no difference. Then in the 1950s actually is where we first start seeing the word gender used to mean something slightly different. It started being used to mean more of this idea of gender roles. This idea that male men have certain roles to fulfill and women have certain roles to fulfill. And it became more evolved from that. If you're a man, that means you have certain interests. It means you do certain things. You act a certain way. You have a certain personality. And if you're a female, if you're a woman, that means that in this way you have certain personalities. You have certain interests. You have certain ways that you do and say things. And so what's happened now is the word gender for many people has become different from the word sex. Because when we use the word gender, what many people mean is this idea of who I am between my ears. And sex is your biology. What I heard described as sex is what's between your legs, gender is what's between your ears. Not saying I agree with that, but we need to understand, if we're going to talk about this conversation intelligently, we need to understand how people are using these words now. And so the problem now has become that people have started separating the two. It's become separating this idea that gender and sex can be different. Because think about it. When I talk about my gender identity, if gender really does just mean what stereotype do I fall under? In other words, here's a box of things that define what a man is. What are things that our culture tends to define as being manly? We have sports. Which sports ball team do you cheer for? What else? Having a beard. Having a big car, having a nice car, being into machines. What else? What are some manly things our society sees that we see as being manly, masculine? Say again? Hunting. Outdoorsy type. Yeah? Yeah, at least 6'2" and muscular. Now, what are things that our society tends to see as more feminine? Being more nurturing. What else? Elegant. What'd you say? Delicate. There we go. Delicate. Yeah, delicate. What else? What are some other things that, as far as what is liked, what are women supposed to like in our culture? The color pink. My daughter loves the Pinkalicious books right now. We won't go there. Here's the thing. If you believe that what defines your gender are those superficial surface characteristics, is it any wonder then that we look at those boxes and say, I may biologically be a male, but I like looking nice. I like doing my nails. I like wearing more delicate things. I like being more nurturing. Therefore, I must actually be a woman. Or if I'm a female, and it's like, I like hunting. I like sports. Back in the day, we called that a tomboy. Now it's, actually, I just am a man. But remember, there is no truth except what you decide that it is and what you feel like it is. So if truth is something that is based on what we feel like it is, it makes perfect sense to say, well, I identify as this other thing. It's almost like someone called it the astrology for college students. What's your sign? What is your identity? What do you identify yourself as? So we need to understand the way that the word is being used today to simply mean how I identify myself as. In other words, gender is just a construct. You guys heard that before? It's a construct, meaning society tells you what your gender is. Because when you think about it, is it manly or womanly to wear a dress? It's okay. It's womanly. Really? So go to Scotland, go up to the biggest, beefiest, red-haired, smelly guy wearing a kilt and say you're dressed like a woman. What's the problem here? Is he dressed like a woman? Why not? Throw you like he throws one of those logs. Why not? Why is he not dressed like a woman? Yeah. Because there is some truth to the fact that how the different genders express themselves can be different from culture to culture. There are some, for example, in India, it is totally normal to see two men holding hands walking down the street. Just completely as friends. That's just a thing that they do. There's nothing weird about that to them. But to us, if I see you two guys walking down the street holding hands, am I going to have some things to say? Probably. So we need to understand that this is where we start getting into the contradictions of the gender ideology, which is that if it's true that gender is defined by society, well, the question then becomes what? Which society? So you think that you're a girl because you like to wear dresses. Okay, go to Scotland. You still be a man. See the issue here. When we think that truth is defined as anything that isn't objective, our thinking starts breaking down. Our thinking starts becoming clouded and confused. You also start getting into some self-contradictions in the whole LGBT idea. For example, anybody tell me, what does the L stand for? Lesbian. What is the G? Gay. What is the T? Trans. Now, this is where we see something very interesting. There's like an internal war going on with the LGBT community, which is that according to the T, gender doesn't really exist. There's not really any such a thing as gender. Well, if that's true, then there's no such thing as the L and the G or the B, because you can't be both of something that doesn't exist. The whole thing starts breaking down, starts falling apart. This is why J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series, very famous author, very outspoken supporter of the L, the G, and the B, but ardently against the T's. She got a lot of heat over the years for that because she recognizes if gender doesn't exist, then, for example, what does women's rights mean? If you're a feminist, you're fighting for women's rights. Well, what is a woman? If gender doesn't exist, if gender is just what you think it is, what are you actually fighting for? See, the whole thing starts to crumble on itself. Just like when Jesus said, if you build your house on sand, what? The whole thing falls down. A worldview that is built on something as rickety and unstable and unreliable as personal preference simply cannot stand up. Let's take a look here at what a couple of things that science says about this. We'll look at what science says and what Scripture says. First of all, science itself does confirm there are only two sexes. Something that Charlie Kirk likes to say back in the day. He says there are two genders and infinite personalities. There are only two sexes. There are also undeniable biological differences between the two sexes. Believe it or not. This means that it's not just a construct. It's not just a thing that exists inside our own heads. There are actual, very real, tangible differences between the two sexes, which means that if somebody's biology is one way and their psychology is another way, then something is wrong. Because are there people out there who genuinely think that they're a different sex than what they are? Yes, that's called gender dysphoria. That is an actual condition that some people have. But you know what? There are also people who genuinely think that they're a different race than what they are. There was a WNBA star some years ago. I don't remember her name, but there was this big thing when she was like one of the only white players pretty much in the whole place. And she began claiming that she was black. How do you think that went? What's wrong with that, though? Why can't you just decide what race you are? There are also people, an actual condition where people think they're a different age than they are. People who are in their 30s or 40s who think that they're under 10. Should we let them go to first and second grade? But that's what they genuinely think that about themselves. Shouldn't we live that out for them? Isn't that the compassionate thing to do? When physiology and psychology don't match, something is wrong. The only question is it with the body or is it with the mind? Dr. Paul McHugh, he's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. He talks about how it's a lot like anorexia. When somebody anorexia is an eating disorder. When somebody has anorexia, we have to understand a person with anorexia genuinely thinks that they're fat. It's an actual thing. Harvard did a study where what they did was they had multiple doorways, each one going a little bit skinnier than the next. And what they did is they had people just real simple, walk through the doorways. And they would walk through the doorways, and eventually it got to the point where you have to open the door and you have to turn sideways to get through it. What they noticed was fascinating is that they intentionally got people with anorexia to do this. People with anorexia would open the door and would turn sideways way before they needed to. They could walk through, it would be like this wide, and they would still turn sideways to walk through it. Why? Because they genuinely thought that they were overweight. They actually saw themselves that way. It's incredibly sad. So let me ask you, is the compassionate thing then to say, you know what, you're right. You are overweight. Let's go give you a liposuction. Is that the compassionate thing to do? But it feels good to them. We're affirming them. Isn't that going to be what's good for them? What's going to happen? Yeah, not good things. See, love is not about affirmation. Let me say that again. Love is not about affirming what a person thinks about themselves. Love is about affirming the truth about a person, which is that their identity comes from something bigger than just what's going on in their own heads. No amount of surgery can change how God made you to be. No amount of a woman getting surgery to look like a man is going to change the reality of what's really going on there. No amount of surgery for a man to try and look like a woman is going to change the reality of what's happening there. This is why for people who get transgender surgery, there's really no significant difference in their mental health. For a little bit, there's a sense of relief. But in the end, it's showing more and more as studies are coming out more and more that it just comes back worse than ever because the root issue wasn't resolved. So this raises the question then, how are we supposed to talk about this with people? Because how many of us have had a very uncomfortable conversation about this with somebody close to us? I have. And it can be so hard, can't it? Because there's so much emotion wrapped up into it. Well, we have to start with understanding why it's so difficult. We need to understand that when a person says, I identify as X, what you and I might hear is, well, I think this about myself, or I feel a certain way. What we have to understand is that that is not what they mean. When a person says, I identify as X, they are saying, this is who I am as a human being. I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that's what is being believed. Because remember, identity comes from what? Purpose. Purpose comes from what? Relationship. And relationship has to be rooted in truth. And if there is no truth, except what I make it out to be, the only relationship that matters is the relationship that's up here with myself. And if that's the only relationship that matters, then my purpose is whatever I make it to be, which means then that my identity is tied to whatever I've decided that is. So we have to understand as Christians, first and foremost, when we're talking about this with somebody, when we say this behavior is sinful, they are, in our minds, we're separating the two. Can we hate somebody's sin while loving them? Yes, you can hate somebody's choices while still loving that person. What we have to understand is that people who are struggling with this issue don't make a distinction between those two things. They don't hear, oh, you hate my behavior. What they hear is, you hate me. Because my behavior and my desires are inextricably entwined with who I am as a person. So for you to say that my behavior is sinful, you are saying that I personally, as a human being, am reprehensible to you and your God. Can that make it real hard to talk about it? So this is why we have to understand this is so difficult to talk with people about. But we, as Christians, we need to understand that this is where people are coming from. Because there's so much confusion about truth, there's confusion about who we even are. So what do I do here? Well, one of the most important things that Scripture talks about when telling the truth, when talking to somebody about this, Bible says that if I have the wisdom of the ages, if I have all authority, but I don't have what? Love, then what? I'm useless. It doesn't do enough for us to know the truth about gender issues if we don't love that person. Because remember, fundamentally, at the core of the issue is a relationship issue. Identity comes from purpose. Purpose comes from our relationships. And if we are acting as if we can just address the identity while keeping the relationship separately, that's not going to go anywhere. So what do we do then? How do I interact with somebody who is going through this, who is struggling with this? There's 3 points to know. First point, Stand firm on your convictions. Love is not about affirming what somebody thinks is true. Love speaks the truth. Love is saying, I want what's best for you, and because truth has consequences, I'm not going to feed an illusion, because that will hurt that person. Not because I need to be right, but it's because I love that person that I have to stand firm on what I believe. That's the first thing. If you love that person, you will not encourage them to run off that cliff. Okay? The second thing is compassion. Recognize that people who are dealing with this issue are hurting. There is so much pain and uncertainty. They've probably already been rejected by many people who they were close to, maybe their parents, family, maybe friends. Chances are they've already dealt with a lot of rejection. So recognize and have compassion for where that person is coming from, the kinds of stress and anxiety that they are dealing with. And then third, and most of all, is love. How do I love somebody who is going through this? Well, what does the Bible say? Love is patient. Love is kind. What else? Love does not boast, is not arrogant or rude. It is not insist in its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It is not rejoiced at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So go 1 Corinthians 13 if you want that list. That is how you love somebody. Let me tell you what someone once told me when I was going through something very difficult that I was very ashamed about. And I opened up to somebody about it. Let me tell you what they told me that absolutely turned me around and brought me back to a place where I could chase after God again. They looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you for telling me." They said, "That must have been so hard for you to tell me that. Thank you for trusting me enough to share that with me." They didn't affirm my behavior. They didn't act like, "Oh, no, it's okay that you..." No. But the fact that I knew that they still cared about me, first and foremost, that was what kept that relationship open to where I was able to go after God once again and find that healing. So first is stand firm on your convictions. Second is compassion. And third is that love. And most important, love, guys, do not be afraid. Especially if you're a parent. My daughter is almost 5 years old. That's a weird thought. And she's going to be she's already asking some questions. If she came to me one day and said, "Dad, I think I'm a boy," there would be some fear in me at that moment. Parents, you agree? There'd be a little jolt of fear. Do you think anything good can come from acting out of that fear? No. That's why it's so important to look at them and say, first of all, thank you for sharing that with me. Show that you value them. Because remember, they think that their value comes from their identity, which is their sexuality, which is their behavior, which is their desires. But as Christians, we know your identity, your purpose, your relationship, your value comes from being made in God's image. And let's remember to treat people that way. I wish there was like that one really easy answer, that one silver bullet for how to answer everybody. But in so many ways, it just depends on the relationship, depends on the person. All I can say is keep those three things in mind and pray that God will give you the discernment and the love and the wisdom to respond in a way that glorifies Him. So that's the issue of gender and things that are being dealt with by this generation. Last one we're going to be talking about is an upcoming issue. A little bit of a lighter note here. AI. Let me ask you guys something. When you hear those dreaded two letters, AI, what are some things that come to your mind? Terminator? Yeah? Robots going to rule us? Clankers? We don't use that word here. What else? Well, seriously, though, what are things that come to your mind when we think about AI in the future? What comes to your mind? Alexa, she's always listening. Always there for you, whether you want her to be or not. Cars. Say again? So, yeah, the graphics chips are not easy to get to, RAM being hard to get to. So there is a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to the issue of AI, artificial intelligence. How many of us use AI for things in our everyday life? Yeah, I'm a teacher. I use AI quite a bit. It's amazing how much it helps me with lesson planning. So we're going to talk about AI and the role that it plays here and the role that it will play in relationship and in identity. The first thing to understand is I want to talk about, just like with social media, AI is a tool. It is not inherently good or evil. It is a powerful tool. And there are so many amazing good things that it is being used for and will continue to be used for that will make everybody's lives better. But like any powerful tool that can be used for good, what? It can be used for evil. Now, what I want to do first is clarify what actually is AI. That is like, what does that mean, AI? What is AI? How does it learn? How does it think? What does it do? What can't it do? So AI, artificial intelligence, is simply put a very complicated domino effect. What we mean is when we think about a computer, what language do computers think in? Binary, ones and zeros. Computers are very complicated calculators. They're like a recipe book. You open up the recipe book, you follow the recipe, you get to a certain result. And the same with computer, you input certain instructions, and it goes through the process and it spits out a certain result based on what you put into it. Computers can't choose what they spit out any more than a recipe, you can choose what comes out of it just because you want the recipe to do something. If I put salt instead of sugar in that cake, is that going to change how it tastes? Even if I really wanted to do something else? Computers are the same way. You input something in, and something is going to naturally come out the other side, going through like a very complicated domino effect. It's going to knock one thing down after the other. Now, what AI is a different way for computers to think and learn based off of how the human brain works. See, the human brain works off of, anybody know what you call the little connections in your brain? Yeah, neurons, synapses. And so the idea is the way your brain works is that it forms connections. When you finish this sentence, the cat sat on the mat. The cat sat on the mat. Now, you repeat. The cat sat on the mat. Oh, hang on. The first time you didn't know, but now you said it. Why is that? Because you made a connection. Your synapses made a connection, and now you're able to remember that connection that's been made. This is what learning means. It's amazing how God made us to work that way. And then what helps to reinforce that for us is that dopamine, that oxytocin, helps to reinforce those connections. Now, what a computer is basically a really big set of data. And it's looking for connections, looking for patterns. What happened was back in 2017, I think it was, the big turnaround came with Google in 2017, where what they said was, we are going to take this computer and we are going to make it read every single thing the human species has ever written ever. Does that sound ambitious? So they put through it everything. They made the computer read all of Wikipedia, made it read every news report from every news website ever written, every library center, literally almost as much of the internet as they could cram through this thing. And then they had it look for patterns. So when I ask you, the cat sat on the mat. How many times did it take you to get that right? Basically once, right? What a computer will do is it will, in the span of a moment, make calculations and find billions and millions of times what is the commonality, or cast that on the rug, the chair, the bed, the seat, the stool, the counter, and it'll find mat being the most common thing that is brought up. And so when you go on ChatGPT and you put in certain words and phrases, What it's doing is it's compiling everything that is in its data banks, and it is finding the patterns based on what it has received. It's a little complicated. Let me ask you this. How many of us have ever seen this before? I don't know. Does that little black part of the square count as part of the motorcycle? I don't know. When you're doing this, not only are you proving that you're not a robot, did you know you're actually training robots when you do this? Because the companies that do this are keeping that data. And so this is done hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of times. The computer's looking and saying, this is a motorcycle, this is not a motorcycle. This is a stairwell, this is not a stairwell. And it is being taught to find those patterns. That's fundamentally how AI works. Now, what exactly does this have to do with the loneliness epidemic we're seeing? What does this have to do with the identity crisis issue that we are currently going through? Well, one of the first things that happens is that AI has learned how to talk to people. How many of us have been in a conversation with AI and it was a little spooky? I recommend, if you haven't yet, go to ChatGPT or Grok or Copilot, wherever one, and just ask it, hey, how are you today? And start a conversation. It's a little spooky how good it's become at mimicking a real person. Because over the years, it has seen billions and billions of examples to learn from. By the way, this is why AI is actually really dumb, because what you learned after one mistake, it took thousands, tens of thousands, millions of tries for that computer to realize what the pattern was. It just does a lot faster than we do. Now, take this ability to converse like a normal person and combine that with a loneliness epidemic. And the fact that I'm feeling lonely, I can pull up my phone right now, go to my ChatGPT app, and I can just tell it, hey, Chat, I'm feeling really lonely right now. Let's see what it says. I'm feeling lonely. Help me feel better. I'm sorry that you're feeling lonely. That must be incredibly difficult. Would you like to talk about it some more with me? Isn't that exactly what we want to hear from a friend? And if you'll recall, what was the bonding chemical again? Oxytocin. See, there's this, just like with social media, they know the psychological tips and tricks to get you to come back. AI companies like OpenAI, like Meta, they want you to use their product. They want you to keep coming back. And so what are some things that they program AI to do to keep you coming back? Well, one thing is that AI tends to be very sycophantic. That's a big word. Anybody know what that means? You know what a sycophant is? Yeah, brown noser. Yeah, kiss up. Somebody who only tells you what? What you want to hear. And that feels good, doesn't it? It feels good when people tell you what you want to hear. It builds up, that oxytocin flows like the river. That trust, that sense of togetherness when people tell you what you want to hear. See, here's the thing. God designed our brains to work a certain way. When we're in relationship, He designed us to have that oxytocin to reinforce that sense of togetherness. But the brain cannot tell the difference between good and bad oxytocin. And so what we're seeing now, and we're going to continue to see, is more and more people turning to AI as a replacement for real relationship. In fact, AI boyfriends and girlfriends. Guys seen commercials for those? You're gonna. They're very big right now. It's an AI that will talk to you, that will listen to you, that can even have the image of a person. And it feels good. It feels good when you're lonely and you don't know what a real good relationship looks like. It seems to work so well. Here's the issue. Things that an AI cannot do, though, is that AI cannot love you. AI doesn't know you. AI doesn't love you. It doesn't care about you. It's just a really complicated domino effect. You put something in, it spits out an average response. But if you don't really know or understand what true love and true relationship looks like, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. In fact, there's already been a bunch of news reports about young people who have taken their own lives after becoming so embroiled in a relationship, quote unquote, with an AI personality that they actually take their own lives from despair, that realizing this isn't real. It's a real thing. Something that Abdul Murray, he's an author who has come out with a book called Stolen ID, talking about AI issue. One thing that he talks about that really struck me, he says, I am not afraid of artificial intelligence becoming more human-like. He says, I'm afraid of humans becoming more machine-like. You see, AI can never truly be elevated to the level of humanity because it can't love, it can't choose. But humanity can be degraded to the level of a machine. We can degrade ourselves and our capacity and our ability to love and our ability to experience joy and hope and peace through our own decisions. And so we need to be very careful when using artificial intelligence to recognize it is not a real person. But we already are seeing so many young people who are so lonely, so desperate for a relationship and the sense of purpose that brings and the identity that comes from that they're turning to it. It's incredibly sad. This is the reality of what we're seeing, and it's only going to get worse. So what can we do about this, both as individuals and just as the church in general? First of all, parents, be aware of how your kids are using AI. Like we said, AI is not good or bad. This is not a here's why AI is evil session, okay? So I'm not saying, oh, you let your kids use AI, you're a bad parent. How many of us, our kids, use AI? For one thing or another. Kids, how many of you guys use AI for one thing or another? It's like, I'm not going to raise my hand now. My parents think I don't use it. Be aware of how your kid is using AI. Okay, you can look at chat history, look at the conversations that your kid is having with artificial intelligence. You say, isn't that a violation of privacy? Unless you can expect your kid to self-regulate dopamine loops and oxytocin drive, if you think that a child can self-regulate addiction, good luck with that. Remember, as parents, our job is not to be a friend. Our job is to be a parent. Be aware of how your kid is using AI. Talk with your kids about it. Talk with them about what it is and what it isn't. Make sure they know that AI is not a real person, a real relationship. And you know what the best way to do that is? Show them what the real thing looks like. And this is the most important point. The most important way that we as the church can address all of these issues: identity, purpose, relationship, social media, gender, AI. The most important thing that we as the church can do to combat a decline is to be the body of Christ. That means go out into the world that is so full of darkness and pain and hopelessness and show people the love of Christ. Be a community. Work together towards something bigger than ourselves. The churches that thrive are the churches that are actively working together to better the world around them. Not just the ones who go on Sundays, say hi to their friends, and then go back and do the rest of their week. The churches that thrive, the churches that make a difference, like in the early church, are the ones that are going out into the world and are bringing light to these dark places, showing people that they are loved. That is how we make a difference for them and for ourselves. So if you want to know who you are, who your identity is, if you don't know who you are, start by asking yourself, what is my purpose? What am I living for? And if you want to understand what is it that I'm living for, I don't know what my purpose is. Ask yourself, what are the relationships that matter the most to you? Because that is what is informing you of your purpose. And that is what's telling you what your identity is. And unless you base it on the truth of Christ, that our identity is to be made in the image of God, to forever enjoy being in a relationship with him and with others. Any identity we put on is just going to be a mask that will eat away at our soul and will only bring despair. But there is hope, because God loves the world so much that he sent his only son. He took on flesh and came to the earth. John Lennox, famous apologist, professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford, says this. We'll end on this point. He says, the most difficult question for any Christian to wrestle with is the question of suffering. The identity crisis we're seeing today, the loneliness, the depression, there's so much suffering in this world, isn't there? There's so much need, so much hopelessness, so much darkness. And he said, how do you address that? And here's what he said. He said, at the center of the Christian message, God is hanging on a cross. And he said, why is God hanging on a cross? How does that solve anything? He says, if nothing else, it tells me this. It tells me that God is not just sitting passively by watching the world. That God has taken on flesh and has rolled up his sleeves and is getting involved in the mess and depravity and hopelessness and misery and pain and depression of our world. And he is getting personally and intimately involved. And it all leads back to his desire for us to know him, to have relationship with him, to know that our purpose is found in that relationship with him, and that our identity is found in who he made us to be. I'd like to close in prayer real quick. Father, thank you so much for your love and your grace and your mercy for us. Thank you that we can always turn to you to find our identity, that whenever I'm wondering who I am and what my purpose is, I can always look at my relationship with you and know that you are always there and you will never turn your back on me. And that you have so much love for me and for the people around me. Pray that we'll help continue to work to find our identity in you, and that which is never changing and will never let us down. Amen.
Thank you, Joseph. Oh no, am I not? Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. We're so glad to have you as a resource and a help to us as we navigate all these things, and we do not have to live in fear. I'm so thankful for the hope we have in Jesus, and just want to encourage you, look around this room, look at who's here. We can continue these conversations with each other. Joseph's going to be here tomorrow morning with our youth and young adults at 9 a.m. in the big room, and then he'll be speaking during service, which is great. Tonight, I know Caleb is taking students and families. They're going to Dairy Queen if you're interested in that, so you can continue the conversation there. We as a church encourage you to be in relationships, be a part of a group. Don't just show up on Sunday. We need more than that. We need more than just coming here one day a week. We need to do life together. So I hope that you'll step into that intentionally after tonight. I do have a couple of instructions. Please pick up your children, first of all. Take them home. I don't think Joel wants to take them home with him. There are pizzas left. If you would like to take one home, please take them. We do have to flip the room back around for tomorrow. So if you're willing to help do that, we would love for you to help. If you do start to do that, anything on the table, just put here on the stage. Tablecloths, make kind of sorting piles. That would be great. And then Minna will direct getting the chairs set back up. I think that's it. I think that's all we have. All right. Thank you all for coming.